Hello and welcome to another Bottled Sky dev video. Last video, I made some systems to spawn asteroids and fill up the game world automatically as you fly around it. I also created the drilling mechanic to interact with those asteroids. And finally, I created items that drop from destroyed asteroids that get stored in an inventory on the shuttle. This video will be a little different. I know in the last video I mentioned that I was going to make several features, including a crafting system, hub storage, and the first enemy to appear in the game. But for this video, instead of just recapping a month of development on various features, I'd like to try making a video that focuses on one specific feature. That feature is the crafting system. I'll be going into some more detail about how and why I'm designing this feature and my decision making for why I choose details to be a certain way. And then I'll talk about some related design features I've seen in other games and give my thoughts on those. Okay, first off, the most important question when designing a new feature is, why do I even want this feature? Game development is a time-expensive endeavor, and therefore it's a waste of time to build features that create clutter and/or don't enhance the overall experience. There are numerous reasons for having a specific feature in your game, but just having an answer to this will give you a clear vision for how to build it. For me, the reasons why I want a crafting system in Bottled Sky are story. It's thematically appropriate for the main character to build things themselves as someone who has been tinkering and building gadgets for most of their life. Gameplay intent. I'd like to encourage the player to completely fill their inventory every time they go out to engage with the world's systems. The player will end up with an excess of items, so this will provide another use for them, hopefully encouraging the player to continue collecting more items. Improving other systems. The output of this feature will help create variety in other core features of the game. For example, consumable items that provide benefits in exploration, gathering, and combat. Although I'd like this to be optional and I won't be balancing difficulty, expecting the player to always have these items. It will also be used to supplement the player's progression in the game by crafting upgrades for the shuttle which provide further variety for how the player can tackle the challenges the game throws at them. This will be less optional, and I will be balancing difficulty around the parts available to equip to the shuttle. Aside from the story reason, you could look at these and say that having a shop to sell excess resources and buy consumables and upgrades would solve all of these problems. And you'd be right. Under the hood, a shop feature can be almost identical to a crafting system. Replace the ingredients of a crafting recipe with some form of currency, change your anvil or something to look like a shopkeeper, and bam, you've got a shop. A shop is an alternative feature that covers all the gameplay reasons for my crafting system to exist. It would even be thematically appropriate in my game world to meet wandering merchants, but not thematically appropriate to always have an easily accessible shop. I may end up adding those wandering merchants to the game in future, but one reason why I'm not doing it now is because I don't have plans to add a main currency, because that is not thematically appropriate for Bottled Sky's setting. This is something I may change my mind on later, but if I wanted a shop now, then it would need to use some kind of bartering system instead. That covers the reasons for why I want to have a crafting system. Let's get into how I'm making this system. So first off, I'm just going to be making the bare bones functionality of a crafting system that you typically see in many other games. That is, you can put some items into this system and get some different items out. I won't be making a user interface for this yet, but when I do, I'll make another video referencing this one. For now, I'll just set up a temporary control that tells the crafting system to craft a specific item when I press a specific button. What you can put in and get out of the system will be defined by crafting recipes. You will have access to some recipes at the start of the game because it makes sense for my character that builds gadgets to already know how to craft some useful items. But as you meet new people and discover new materials, it makes sense that the character will learn new things and experiment to gain access to new recipes. That is the thematic reason for why the crafting system will be a source of progression in the game. Currently, I only have 2 items in the game. These are copper and iron, which you can collect by breaking asteroids. I will create a 3rd item called a medkit, which will be obtained through the crafting system by following the medkit recipe. The medkit recipe right now asks for 3 copper and 1 iron. Crafting an item requires access to the recipe and having the ingredients listed on the recipe itself. Overall, coming up with this solution and creating it on stream took about 3 hours. So far, this is a simple and robust system to code for. I can have any number of inputs and get any number of outputs. I can even allow NPCs and enemies in the world to craft things because they can also have their own inventories and collect things. I don't even have to use items thanks to the programming magic of interfaces and generics, although I don't see a reason to use anything else right now. So that concludes the design and development of my crafting system. As I said before, I won't be making a UI for this until later, because an intuitive, non-intrusive crafting interface is arguably even more important than the underlying system itself, and this deserves its own video. Lots of games have crafting systems, and there are lots of different styles of interfaces to consider. From this point on in the video, I'm going to talk about some crafting systems with notable features that I like or dislike, or I think are otherwise interesting. Failure chance. On the surface, this sounds terrible, and in many cases it is. Players will lose their earned items for no reward, and they had no recourse to affect the outcome. Players might feel compelled to start save stating, which is the action of saving the game before doing an action you might fail, so that you can attempt the same action over and over without suffering the consequences of said failure. This is certainly tedious, and it circumvents the whole reason for having failure in a game to begin with. This is a sure sign that you haven't made failure feel fun or rewarding. However, presentation and implementation of this feature can make both success and failure feel immensely rewarding. Failure chance can make narrative sense if your character is learning or working with complex and unfamiliar materials. To follow through with this idea, you should simulate the character learning, which can come in the form of increasing the success rate whenever you attempt to craft an item. That way, whenever you fail a crafting attempt, the player still feels like they're progressing and gaining something. People learn from failure and success in real life, so characters in video games should too. This is something I may consider adding into the game later, but for the beginning of the game, I want to present the main character as someone that is already fairly competent at crafting. When I start adding alien materials, then it might make sense to have a failure chance until the character becomes more confident in working with those materials, but it's something I still have plenty of time to think about for now. Order of inputs. Games such as Minecraft want you to place your items in a specific order to get the correct output, and changing the order might mean getting a different item. This might be a good idea for my game because it encapsulates the idea of experimentation, especially if you're not told exactly what all the recipes are beforehand. Figuring out all the recipes can itself be a fun activity, like in Doodle God, where this is the entire game. If you can convince the player that they are building the item, then that can make the crafting system feel more engaging than simply clicking a recipe and getting the result immediately. This does have some downsides though. It will likely require more effort from the player to perform a single craft action, so if you need to do this a lot, it might get a bit tedious. Ensure you have efficient tools to help the player fill out a recipe quickly. Minecraft is quite a good example of this, where it has lots of depth in its drag and drop system to pick up and place exactly what you need in roughly the amounts you need them very quickly. Another downside happens if your recipes are unknown to the player or difficult to remember. I'd be worried about encouraging players to divert themselves to a wiki page that shows all the recipes, because the idea of experimentation also implies the possibility of failure. This isn't a reason to not have unknown recipes, just make sure that failure is still just as meaningful as success. Nested subrecipes. This is not one I see too often. To explain, It's when a crafting recipe requires ingredients that are also obtained from crafting recipes. The rabbit hole can get quite long. It adds quite a lot of depth, but also a lot of complexity that can easily overwhelm the player. Quite often, this feature obscures the actual raw material cost of recipes that require more crafted ingredients. It can be very frustrating and tedious to get halfway through crafting all the sub-materials, only to then realize you didn't have enough of the base raw materials because you miscalculated all the requirements. This can, however, be a source of fun for a game. For example, games like Satisfactory are essentially all about crafting and automating that process. You could manually craft everything you need, but it can be quite satisfying to build a complex web of machines that produce, convert, and combine materials that ultimately give you the output you need to unlock an even deeper tier of crafting. In most other games, however, nested sub-recipes don't give that same level of satisfaction. The main reason I see for its existence is to ensure early game materials are still useful in later game crafting recipes. This is as good of a reason as any, depending on what you want to motivate the player to do, but ensure you have a good interface to make the real cost clear and not too tedious to get the result you want. Missing information. Earlier I mentioned Doodle God, which is a game purely about crafting. You have infinite amounts of all materials. You don't know what you can make, but you quickly learn that you can combine what you have to make new materials, and the recipes resemble some sort of real-world logic, like earth and fire makes lava. This isn't something that would work for most games, but you can also have missing information without being so open-ended. For example, you can show the player a recipe where the output is hidden until you craft that item for the first time. This generally feels good to a player from a progression standpoint, especially if the unknown item is always something useful. However, if the player does this and doesn't find the result very useful, then you may end up encouraging the player to divert to a wiki that contains that information before they waste their earned resources in future. Let me know in the comments what interesting features you've seen in crafting systems. Context is important too. What's terrible in one game may make a lot of sense in another. Anyway, now that I've reached the end of this video, I suppose I didn't expect it to be this long. Making the crafting system itself took only 3 hours, and this video has taken over a week, so if I want to focus on developing my game, this is certainly not very time efficient. However, if you like this style of content where I talk about the different designs of specific systems that appear in games, then like the video and let me know if there's something else you'd like me to discuss. Subscribe and bell to be notified of future videos. Thanks for watching, that's all for now, and I'll see you later.